Hi everyone, I'm the Limitless Librarian and this is my review of Lord of the Flies by William Golding. This book is a classic, a modern classic. It's often something that you have to read in school. I didn't, but that's because I stopped doing English in school after year 10, and I know someone who did English later and I did read it. So this is a modern classic, and it's actually 70 years old. It was published in 1954. So it turns 70 years old this year, which I'm going to say when I was reading this, it did not feel like a 70-year-old book. Anyway, I read this as part of my Dymocks reading challenge, the beach read prompt, as this was quite frankly the only book on my TBR that really had any sort of beachy, summery theme to it. This book is obviously very famous, being, as I said, a modern classic and notorious schoolroom, classroom study read. And quite frankly, I'm glad that I did not have to read it in school, because that has soured certain books for me that I had to read for school, even though I would have ordinarily enjoyed them. I've seen multiple instances where in situations where a group of children are isolated and left to fend for themselves for whatever reason are compared to this book, regardless of whether or not things do have the same outcome as this particular story does. So going into this book, I already had a sort of a general idea of what it was about. A group of schoolboys get stranded on a deserted island, and they're left to fend for themselves with no adult supervision, and things kind of go downhill, shall we say. I don't want to spoil things, but also, as I said, given how famous this book is and how it's commonly used as a metaphor for society going downhill and left to fend for itself, I think if you've heard of this book, you know that that's the general gist of it. So to briefly restate what it's about, we have a group of schoolboys. I think the oldest one is like 12. They're honestly a lot younger than I thought they were going to be. I thought they were going to be like 16, high school kids, but no. The oldest of them is like 12, I think, if I recall correctly. And the youngest ones are like 6. And they were on a plane for whatever reason, and it crashed on this deserted island with just them, no adults. And so they're left to figure things out for themselves, make a plan, decide what to do. We follow our main character is named Ralph, and they, in the first chapter, essentially elect him to lead the group and make the decisions, decide what to do, and what the group's priorities will be. However, over the course of the story, things take a turn. A rival boy named Jack, who is the leader of like a church choir, he calls into question Jack's priorities of getting rescued, and so there is conflict for leadership, changing loyalties between the boys, where normal sort of schoolyard arguments that you would expect between boys of this age suddenly have the potential to affect everyone's survival and eventual fate on this island due to these circumstances. And so this book explores these themes of society, isolation, order, or lack thereof. What happens when there's nobody around to enforce rules or decide rules officially. Leadership and when it is challenged, and why people follow the leaders they do, why people become a leader or a follower, and just generally human nature and what happens when it is isolated from the trappings and expectations and unspoken rules of society as a whole. So, what are my thoughts? I quite enjoyed this book. It's also not very long. It's like 230 pages-ish, so not a very long classic. And as I said, it really does not show its age. I like this, even though I knew it was 70 years old because it says so on the back. This honestly read like something from the 1970s alongside early Stephen King. Like, this honestly feels like British Stephen King in the setup, the atmosphere, the characterization of the characters, and the sort of the dark, oppressive feelings that you get when the story starts to take a turn for the worse. So I think this book has aged quite well. There are like one or two racial sort of things there. It does use the N word like once, but um, I don't think that this book is trying to make a sort of racist message. If anything, on the contrary, the point of the book is anyone can turn out the way that these boys eventually do on this island. It's a little bit of a Ring of Gyges story. If you're not familiar, the Ring of Gyges is a sort of anecdote that appears in Plato's Republic, and it concerns what people do when there is no way to hold them accountable. The picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde is kind of a similar situation, where basically the Ring of Gyges basically follows this guy named Gyges who finds a ring that turns him invisible, and so it poses the question of what does he do with this ring? Does he choose to follow societal rules and behave morally, even when he can't be held accountable for what he does while he wears the ring? Or does he just take advantage of the situation and act selfishly or immorally, or be more willing to go against society's unspoken rules and expectations because nobody can hold him accountable or criticize him for violating them because nobody knows it was him that did whatever he did when he was invisible. So this story is a little bit similar, in that the boys are free to decide the rules themselves and how they will operate, because they don't have adults looking over their shoulder or society's laws to follow or anybody to tell them how to behave. But of course, this story takes that to a greater extreme because there's nobody to tell them what to do. These are just kids. Kids need order, they need structure, they need rules and systems and structure to tell them how to operate and how to function in certain situations. And they are having to make big decisions in this book, like making a fire to make smoke signals to attract rescue, or hunting for food, and whose job is what. And so the boys frequently end up in conflicts because people aren't doing the jobs that they were assigned, and because these are just kids, they have limited ability to enforce the rules they decided upon. So in summary, I definitely get why this is something that is worth examining and studying. I understand why it's the sort of thing that schools like kids to study, because it does explore human nature and themes and society and how absolute those societal rules and norms are and how enforceable they are when there is no eye peeping over your shoulder to ensure that you are following them. And it also explores what happens when people are left to decide the rules for themselves, especially kids, because as I stated earlier, things that would, under normal circumstances, not really be the sort of major quarrels that would affect your life, actually do have further repercussions in this story because of the dangerous life or death sort of situation that they are in. Their very survival depends upon their ability to adapt to their situation and do what needs to be done, and even just understand what it is that needs to be done, and to function as a group well. As for how I felt personally reading this book, I definitely enjoyed it, and as I said, it felt like early Stephen King in the atmosphere, the tension, the build up of tension, and these sort of creepy horror sort of elements that crept in, which I definitely like. It didn't go into much of the characters or history in the way that Stephen King does, but that's okay. It didn't really need to. It's vaguely alluded that society outside has kind of imploded, but we don't really find out much about that situation. We don't find out much about who the boys were before they showed up here. And it doesn't really matter because that's kind of the whole point of the book, is to explore what happens when they are cut off from society. Because really, in this situation, your history shouldn't really matter. Where you came from shouldn't matter, because this group should have other priorities now. They're all in the same boat. They all need to survive and get rescued. They all have the exact same problems now, at least in theory. You'll have to read the book to find out just how easily, or not, it is for the boys to shed their histories. So I think this is an interesting examination of these themes of human nature and society and isolation from society and how that turns out. And as I said, an interesting Ring of Gyges style story. And as I said, even though this book turns 70 years old this year, it really does not feel like that, and it has aged quite well, and I believe is still very relevant and worth reading today. So thank you for watching. If you liked the video, if you found it useful, please like and subscribe for more book reviews. And let me know, have you read Lord of the Flies? Did you study it in school, or did you read it independently? Whatever your experience was with this book, let me know down in the comments. And as always, do lots of maths, read lots of books, and I'm sure you'll have an orderly day.